Take you to court? Why, I didn't know you felt that way. This chain of events started almost 20 years ago and involves myself and a notoriously snooty national real estate agency. I once rented a property through an agency from 2004 to 2006. Due to my ex-partner's explosive and violent temper, we had been handed an eviction notice. There was damage to the property that was unfixed at the time that we were evicted. Damage that was in the form of fist and hammer-sized holes in the walls and so on. We obviously did not receive any of the bond deposit back, as the repair cost more than absorbed the amount. There was also an added sum of about $1,700 extra to cover the rest of the cost incurred repairing the damage. This amount was forwarded to a debt collections agency. The collection amount was in both of our names as we had jointly been on the lease agreement. I was not upset at the agency. They were just doing their job by being a good advocate for the owner of the property at this stage. Taking the bond and charging us for the repair was standard and not nasty, vindictive, or overkill in the slightest. My anger came later. Although I must admit I was a bit miffed to be duly held financially responsible for the damage caused by my ex, but due to the nature of the joint lease, not much could be legally done. I was just grateful that we had parted ways not long after. A few years post-eviction, I wanted to get my life more organized in many areas and tie up any loose ends that would impede me moving forward. A clean slate, so to speak. So the debt issue came first. After many phone calls and some paperwork exchange, plus an escalation or two, the debt collection agency finally agreed to split the $1,700 damage bill between the ex and myself. Now I could pay off half and not be held liable for his portion any longer. This had to be done without his consent, as he refused. I'm unsure as to why, possibly hoping that I would pay the whole lot to rebuild my credit rating, or most likely just to be annoying. Once I had paid off my portion of the collector's debt, I thought that I was done with the whole business and the black mark against my name. Not so, unfortunately. It turned out that the state that I lived in had a blacklist that real estate agencies and lessors could add the tenants' names to. It's called the TICA list. All they needed was proof that the tenant had behaved in a bad enough manner regarding renting of a property to warrant being listed. Due to the fact that we had been evicted, the damage, and also owed arrears to a debt agency for repairs, we unfortunately qualified. Being on this list made it almost impossible to rent, especially via a real estate agency. After speaking extensively with the RTA, which is a government agency, I found out that I was definitely eligible to have my name removed from the list, so I started taking action for this to happen. I was able to demonstrate good faith by having paid for half of the damages, and it also went in my favor that my partner was abusive and there was legal evidence of this fact. However, I was told that the only way to have my name removed was by the real estate agency, so I approached them and asked them to do so. They were very helpful initially. If I was able to show them proof that the debt was settled, then they were happy to remove my name. At least 7 years had elapsed by this point, so it was considered punishment enough. At the time, after 5 years, your name is usually removed from the TICA list. However, this company apparently kept tabs on who they'd added to the list, and when the person's 5 years expired, well, they just added them again. Dirty tactics indeed, and obviously, I'd been re-added. So I provided relevant documents to the agency and was assured that my name would be removed as soon as they located my file. This apparently had been stored away in archives as much time had passed since I'd rented with them. I was told this would take a week maximum. All good. So I called a week later and was told to wait another week, still in a kind, helpful, and cordial tone. I called again after that time and was told to wait, you guessed it, another week. And this time, I detected a tone of frost in the reply. So I called back more than a week later just to show patience, and now was spoken to in a very haughty manner. I was informed that my request was bothersome, being so because what I asked was not important and finding my file was a waste of their staff time. They would call me when they got around to it. I expressed how important it was personally and then heard the magic words, almost verbatim, If you want us to do this so badly, we will only be forced to help you if ordered. Perhaps you should take us to court if you can't be patient. Goodbye. String me along? Okay, game on. I had a feeling this was all done to avoid removing my name as they found my file. Also that they were stalling and wanted me to stay blacklisted. But I wasn't backing down without a fight, and so I took their advice. I filed against them to have the matter seen in a small claims court. It cost me $35, which would be reimbursed by the agency if I won. I didn't have anything to lose, and I wanted them to know that not all people will hold indefinitely or continue to be unjustly punished for longer than fair. It was listed to appear in about 4 days from filing. As soon as they received the court date paperwork, I was suddenly bombarded with phone calls. How dare I take the agency to court when they were working their hardest to find my file and help me? Doing my best to sound apologetic for taking their advice, I thanked them for the suggestion, as it seemed there would now be a time frame, at least for the matter to be dealt with. On the day of court, I had 3 sheets of paper as my sole evidence. A statement showing that the repair bill had been paid and there was no finances outstanding. A statement from the RTA that I was eligible to have my name taken off the TICA list. And lastly, a document stating that it was at the behest of the real estate agency to remove my name and that they had no good reason not to. Not 1, but 2 agents for the company showed up to court. When it came before the judge, both parties had to give evidence if relevant. I handed in my 3 pages. Seeing them pass the judge a thick folder of paperwork, including photos of the property damage, was rather amusing, considering they supposedly couldn't find my file when last requested. The judge asked them for a statement. They went on for a few minutes about why I didn't deserve to be removed and justified their stance with the photos and prior rental history with them. All I had to reply was that I had paid for my share of the damage, that the damage was due to my abusive ex, and that I had made restitution as much as I could regarding the matter, with no money owing. The judge then asked why I had brought it to court. I explained that the company was dragging their feet removing my name when it was a simple matter, and it wasn't necessarily fair to do so. That I had called them repeatedly and waited while they found my, so hard to locate, paperwork that had somehow miraculously appeared when convenient. That being on the TICA list was harmful to my future chances at renting, and also that my name had been resubmitted after dropping off of the list. The judge queried them why they had added my name again. They stated that it was company policy, and the judge expressed agreement with my stance. I had been punished enough. I had made financial restitution, and now that my file had been located, I was not to be blacklisted anymore. Case decided in my favor. A win. The real estate agency was given 48 hours to submit proof to the court and a copy to myself that I was now off the list. Also, they had to pay for the $35 that I spent taking them to court. The pair of agents walked out in a huff and were on the phone out in the hallway immediately after vacating the courtroom. I floated past them as I was on a justice high. As I got to the lifts, I thanked them for coming and their sound advice in recommending court. Also, that I was grateful for the bottle of wine they would be buying me with the $35 I was to be paid back. The look on their faces was priceless. Isn't this some comeuppance? They take advantage of the person, the company versus little guy, thinking that you're just going to back down and be afraid, but then you step up and take him down. Way to go. What do you do? I once had a neighbor call the police on me for my nighttime adventures, posted by Background Target 940. When I was about 19, I lived with my grandmother. She lived in a semi-detached house. The neighbors to our left were amazing. The neighbors from the right had only recently moved in, so we didn't know much. That was until New Year's Eve that year. My grandmother decided that she wanted to visit family that day, so she agreed for me to have a small party for the occasion at her property. Side note, we lived across from a pub. This will make sense later in the story. At around 11:45 p.m. that night, me and my friends were a little merry and were singing Livin' on a Prayer by Bon Jovi when I hear a very loud banging on our side door. I leave the back door as we never used the side door and started round to the front of the house to see what was going on. As I got to the gate of my backyard, I could see a male figure still banging on my door. When he heard the gate, he spun around and started towards my back gate. I'd never met this man before, but he started screaming at me about how we were being too loud and how they had a baby next door that they couldn't settle, which I wasn't aware of. When my friends heard the screaming, all music was shut off and everyone came to see what was happening. I tried to calmly apologize to this man and explain that we will turn the music down and quiet down and explain that we were just having a little get-together for New Year's and that's why it was going on so late. I'm quite a timid person when confronted with new people, so one of my male friends stood behind me to make sure that I was safe and to make sure that I was comfortable. My friend then plainly stated, "We are across from a pub that is 10 times louder than our little get-together. Maybe that could also be a reason why they were struggling getting their child to sleep." That's when the man started screaming that he was going to off us and terrible other things. All sorts. At this point, a friend of mine decided that it was best to call the police. We called them while this man stood screaming about taking out me and my friends. The police arrived and I walked to them and stated, "It's the man in the gray jumper," to which the man turned round and screamed at me, "I'm not a jumper." At that point, the police could see how hostile this man was and removed him from the property. At that point, I was escorted into my kitchen and was asked about what happened. After telling the police what had happened, the police officer asked for 5 minutes while he checked on the man. Within 2 minutes, he came back into the kitchen and said, "Usually we would ask if you want to press charges and have him arrested, but unfortunately, he's already been arrested due to assaulting a police officer." Then, when they left, I thought everything was fine, but it wasn't. 2 weeks later, I was in my room with a friend who had been staying with me for a few weeks when my grandmother shouted to tell me that the police were here to see me. I instantly thought it was about what had happened at New Year's, but I was very wrong. When I asked the police what this was about, they said, "We've been called by your neighbors due to a noise complaint." I then asked if this was in regards to New Year's Eve, to which the police officer said, "No, we've been called out due to a noise complaint from a neighbor in regards to the past 2 weeks." I asked what they meant, as we hadn't had any complaints other than the New Year. The female police officer then took me aside and said, "Basically, one of your neighbors has apparently been round numerous times and asked you to keep the noise down at night." I explained that this wasn't true, as the only person who had been round in regards to noise was the man from New Year's. She then said, "Well, apparently you've been having extremely loud adult time and the neighbors have asked you to be a little quieter, and every time they do, you've gotten louder." At this point, me and my friend started laughing. Yes, wrong time, but we couldn't believe what we were hearing. I politely explained to the officers that the only people who live here are myself and my grandmother, and the only visitor we have had was my friend who had been staying and my parents who had visited a couple times. I explained that I had not had an adult partner in months and that I felt very disgusted that I had to explain this to police officers. At that point, the police looked extremely fidgety and they thanked me and left, not before saying, "Also, the neighbor asked that if you were ever having any kind of get-together to let them know." At that point, I knew that the man who had been round at the New Year was part of this. Now, I'm rather petty. Yes, it's not the greatest thing, but I am. So for about 6 months, until they moved out, I would write a letter to both of my neighbors, didn't want to assume, every time we had any kind of get-together, informing them that this would be happening. For example, we're having a barbecue on such a date, or we're having a children's party on such a date. My grandmother loved throwing her grandchildren parties at her home as she couldn't get out much. But I did say I was petty, so every day they would get a letter saying, "Tomorrow we'll have the postman visit." Every time my parents came around, "We're having 2 people visit at such a time on this date." Every time we had a parcel delivered, "Tomorrow we'll have a delivery man visit." It got to the point to where my neighbor's wife came to my home to apologize on her husband's behalf because he wanted the letters to stop, but didn't want to apologize as he felt he had done nothing wrong. So I explained that this was what the police had advised me and that I would happily stop if he himself asked me to. The neighbors, who were amazing on the left, found every letter absolutely hilarious, even coming out to collect them like the newspaper. Also, my grandmother was just like me. She found the letters hilarious. She found the police coming around about my adult life hilarious. That was just who she was. After they moved, we didn't have any more noise complaints, nor did we send any more letters. My grandmother lived there up to the day she passed, and I still live there now and haven't had any issues since. Nasty neighbor, posted by I Admire Hedgehogs. Got a question to post since I am completely puzzled what to do in this case. I live in a 3-story apartment on the 2nd floor. This is my 3rd year lease. I suppose I got a new neighbor on the floor above since I started hearing kids making lots of noise. Doesn't bother me much, since most of the time I'm on my PC wearing headphones. Recently, apartment management decided to do an annual inspection, and I got a notice of lease violation, trash on my balcony, and a trash bag. Well, I haven't looked outside on the balcony for probably a year. So I found a plastic plate and a Walmart shopping bag and enough of animal fur to knit a sweater. I cleaned it up to not get another notice of violation. The next day, I noticed water running from the top floor balcony with more animal hair precipitating, reported that to the leasing office. There was no response. I went to the office and I showed the pictures, and later I got an email that they addressed the issue with the neighbors. Problem is, I got more animal hair on the balcony. I went to the office to show new pictures and was told that the neighbors had a big black dog and will be getting a fine, and next time if they keep making a mess, they'd be getting an eviction. I cleaned the balcony, hoping it was the last time. Guess what? Next day I come back from work, I get 2 buckets of water flushed from the top floor and more hair dropped. Now I am really puzzled what to do. On one hand, the top resident keeps making a mess. On the other hand, I don't want to get fined myself for a mess that I don't create. Nor do I want to get people evicted, potentially losing a monthly lease. What's the best course of action? Report that to management straight up, OP. Upper class Karen disrespected my family and then tried to attack me when I retaliated, posted by No State Greenery. So yesterday, my family and I went out for a nice dinner and a trip to the movies. This is something we rarely do, since we live moderately far apart and we all work our own jobs. Our party included my dad, my mom, my sister, and me. Everything was pretty chill and we were enjoying ourselves. The food was nice and the movie was kind of funny. Nobody was expecting what had awaited us just moments later. When the movie ended, we started walking out of our row towards the exit. This cinema is rather small, so there was only one door. When I looked back up to see where the rest of my family was, I saw that my mother was arguing with a couple. The man was a balding middle-aged snob with thick glasses and an oily face. The woman was dressed in a black dress, golden necklace, and had a fake blonde Karen haircut. Both had this unbearable upper-classy, I'm better than you feel oozing out of them. It was pretty clear that they didn't want to get up to let my mother pass through. Now, you see, my mother has a medical problem with her knee. She wanted to pass the row in this specific direction so that she doesn't have to huddle through the whole length of the row to get out. She tried to explain this to the woman, Karen, but Karen just made fun of her, taunting her with, "Oh, just climb over me then," and "No, I can't let you pass, I want to see the credits." I saw how, after a while of arguing, Karen put her feet demonstratively on top of the seat in front of her to block my mother's way. My mom was all worked up, crying, and passed me by the exit, taking the long way. I don't take disrespect lightly, and I knew that if I didn't act, this scene would follow me for some weeks. I remembered that I have my water bottle with me, filled to the brim. So I took it out, walked back to where the couple was still sitting, and gave Karen and her boyfriend a refreshing shower directly onto their bellies and laps. They clearly saw me coming and looked at me, all smug and victorious, until the water hit them. Karen and her boyfriend looked shocked and had this "how could you" face on. Her boyfriend, who also yelled at my mom previously, confronted me with a quiet and shaky, "Why would you do that? You can't do that." Because apparently, Karen and her boyfriend never learned that their actions have consequences. As I turned to leave, I saw Karen going full rage mode. She was climbing over her boyfriend in the seats to get to me. Her partner yelled something like, "Karen, please leave it as it is, don't do it." Just as I went through the exit, I realized that she made her way right behind me. I turned and she was standing there with raised fist, like 2 steps apart from me. I looked at her and asked, "Oh, so you want to fight?" And Karen, glaring with the rage of 1,000 sexually frustrated middle-aged women, sputtered, "Yeah, let's fight." I'm a 23-year-old guy, fairly muscular and big into fighting sports. I've been training both Wing Chun and Muay Thai for quite a while now. since it's fun and it adds to my overall fitness. Don't worry, I didn't obliterate Karen. I also didn't really attack her. I just assumed my fighting stance, took a step forward, and asked her again if she really wants to fight. Karen was still there in all her freshly soaked glory, seething with rage. Now, at this point, I kinda wish she would try to hit me so I could bring her down in an elegant self-defense kind of way. But she just stared at me, so I threw a halfway warning shot, kinda center kick in her direction, not hitting her, but to establish distance. Next thing I know is that Karen ran back into the cinema and my sister and mother were getting in my way to end the situation. Karen was hiding behind some people in the cinema, and I shouted something like, "Where are you going, Karen? I thought you wanted to fight." Her balding middle-aged boyfriend walked to the exit, saw me, and went wide-eyed again, completely overwhelmed with this situation. We then turned and left. A very kind woman reassured us that Karen acted weird and uncontrolled. She speculated that Karen was on drugs or something. Well, after all, we got a good story out of our family night, and all Karen and her seemingly enslaved boyfriend got was wet clothes and dirty looks. A fair deal. Update. To all that commented that I escalated the situation, you're absolutely right. This story is about how I reacted right in this moment. You can form your opinion of me based on this story, and that is completely valid. I never was in a situation like this, and I wanted to share my experience. My goal is not to get you to praise me. Based on the comments, there is a large array of different ways on how to act in such occasions.
So sue me, really? I was working 40 hours a week programming at my main job, but I did occasional small projects in the evenings and on weekends for other clients. At one point, I was referred to a large company that runs major stadiums and event venues around the country. One of their stadiums is relatively close to where I live. I'll just call them Mark 1 for this story. The saga begins. This manager at Mark 1 said they wanted a simple administration database and user interface for employee timekeeping. Apparently, the old system they had was not working for them. I got the details of what they wanted and drafted a set of specifications. Told them that I could write the system to the specs for $2,000 flat rate. They agreed. I immediately went to work and churned out a database and UI for the system with full documentation in about 2 weeks, so I scheduled an in-person meeting to show them. Now, when I showed up at the meeting, someone representing the security department was there, and he asked about getting some additional features. Sure, I told him, I can do that. So I went back, I wrote up a change request and incorporated the additional features into the platform. I scheduled another meeting with Mark 1 for a couple of days later. When I got to that meeting, I noticed the audience had grown. There were now 2 extra people from the finance department. "Can you add feature X, feature Y, and feature Z?" they asked. Sure, no problem. So I left, wrote up a change request, and added the features. A few days later, I met with them again. Imagine my surprise when the audience size had grown and the new attendees asked for more features. This went on for about 5 more rounds, and I was getting frustrated that I had spec'd out a 2-week project that was now taking months, and I wouldn't be paid until I delivered and they accepted the final product. But I chugged along, implementing all their change requests. But one day, the Mark 1 manager called me. Apparently, she had been speaking with other departments that weren't represented in her status meetings of ever-increasing mass. She gave me a list of dozens of new features that they wanted, some of which would require a complete redesign of the core database and an overhaul of the UI. I had had enough. I told her, hey, this is a complete overhaul of the original spec. I'll have to redesign and rebuild this from the ground up. Well, that's not my problem, she responded. Well, actually it is. I'm not going to design and build an entirely new system until you pay me for the current one, built to the specs that we agreed on. After a short pause, she dropped the bomb on me. Well, we're not going to renegotiate. You can consider this project cancelled.
"That's not how this works. You still have to pay me for the work that I've done." "No, I don't. You haven't delivered anything. Sue me." And she hung up. Cue the malicious compliance. Meet me at the courthouse. I took Mark I manager's advice and went to the courthouse the next day to file in small claims court to recover $2,000 from Mark I. On my court date a couple of months later, I went down to the courthouse and was greeted by an arbitrator. In my state, they have court-appointed arbitrators meet the litigants when they arrive to see if the parties can sort out the case with an agreement to maximize the judge's time. The arbitrator asked me, "Is there anything that you would agree to resolve this immediately?" I thought about it and I said, "Hey, if they'll pay me 90%, $1,800 right now, I'll drop the suit." He then went into a side room where the Mark I manager and the corporate lawyer were hanging out. I heard her screaming that they would either pay it all or pay zero. The arbitrator came to me with the news, and I told him, "Hey, I heard and I'm happy to take it all." He laughed and said, "No, they want to go to trial." Fast forward a couple of hours. Fast forward is a funny phrase considering how slow the court moved, but hey, and we're standing in front of the judge. I'm at my table alone, and the Mark I manager and lawyer are standing at the opposite table. The judge asked Mark I manager to tell her side first. She went into a very long speech about the project in corporate America and apple pie and thermonuclear weapons, and honestly, I have no idea, because I stopped listening about 28 minutes ago. She talked non-stop for at least 30 minutes. Then the judge asked me for my story. Now, I wasn't maliciously ignoring Mark I manager's long-winded tale of political intrigue and patriotism. I was actually formulating a strategy. Well, I thought to myself, the judge probably had people who liked to speechify in front of him all day, every day. I also thought he might appreciate a short and sweet story that got straight to the point and didn't waste his time. So I said, "Hey, Your Honor, they agreed to pay me $2,000 to design and build a software system for them. I completed the work based on the agreed specs, and then they decided to cancel the project after I was done." That was it. Then the judge asked me, "How do I know you did the work?" I had printed out the specs, change requests, documentation, and source code the night before. I lifted a ream of paper, 500 pages, from my table, and I offered it to the bailiff. "Here's the code I wrote for them, Your Honor." The bailiff came to take it from me, and the judge waved him off. "No need, I can see it from here." The judge then asked the Mark I manager, "Is this true?" She looked like she was in a daze. Yes." Then I fined the plaintiff in the amount of $2,000. Screw you, pay me. About a month later, Mark I still hadn't paid, so I called the county sheriff and explained. Sent him the court judgment documents, and he said, "Yeah, no problem, they'll pay." The sheriff actually called me later that day. He was on a cell phone and I could hear him talking to the Mark I manager. He told her to cut a check for $2,000 right now, or he was going to, quote, "rip your computers out of the wall and auction them off until the judgment is satisfied," end quote. I don't know if he had that authority, but the sheriff seemed to have a grudge against Mark I, and he was reveling in the opportunity to dog them out. Apparently, Mark I believed he had the authority because, long story short, the sheriff had a $2,000 check in his hand about 15 minutes later, and it was in my mailbox about a week later. Classic malicious compliance here. They think they're just going to win and take advantage of you, thinking you won't fight back, but then you do and stick to your guns and win it in the end. What would have you done? Don't want to follow the rules of the log haul road? Sure, go right on through. Posted by Scarlet Witch 713. For context, I, 27-year-old female, work for a small local security company. We mainly do oil and gas and logging roads. I typically work pipeline security, but I'm between sites at the moment waiting for spring breakup, which is when the ground starts to thaw and the heavy equipment and trucks can't operate because this is swampland. Before breakup, they've got a 24/7 log haul happening on one of the big logging roads in our area. Now, because of this, traffic going against the log trucks is being restricted by us.
I sit down at the far end of the log road and control who can go through the wrong way. This is limited to 3 companies and their subcontractors because their sites are close to my end of the road and they don't interfere with the log trucks. Any company that's in violation of this rule receives a $10,000 fine and their road use privileges are affected. In this case, they can still only travel one way on the road once breakup hits, and the log haul has to stop until the logging company says otherwise. One company in particular has been one massive pain this whole time. Let's call them Stupid Incorporated for privacy reasons. Now, Stupid Incorporated's site sits about halfway down the log road. They have to go down to the far end of the road and drive the same direction as the log trucks. Well, they don't bother telling their subcontractors this, so all day, every day, I'm busy turning these guys away. One morning last week, this big pickup pulls up, and I ask the usual of, "Hey, where are you headed?" He gave me the kilometer number of where the site is. It's Stupid Incorporated. Only, he gives me a different company name, a subcontractor. We'll call that one Jerk Company. I informed the guy that he couldn't go this way, and he lost it. He starts cursing and swearing, yelling about how it's complete BS and I shouldn't be allowed to do this. He tells me he's gone this way down the road plenty of times when he's not working, and it's never been an issue. The thing is that private users, so just regular people, are technically allowed. Legally speaking, we can't stop them, as roads are public to a degree. There's a whole thing that I'm not going to get into. Private users are allowed to use the road, though we strongly caution against it. He said, "All right, then I'm a private user and you can't stop me." I reply, "Well, you just told me that you're here for work, but all right, if you say so, you've been warned," and he floors it on down the road. What followed was a 4-day manhunt. I immediately notified the road patrol supervisor, as well as road patrol and my boss. I was asked questions for 4 days while they tried to identify this guy. Because he said he was going to work for Stupid Incorporated, they got hit with the fine. Of course, this didn't go over well with them either. The next thing I know, the site superintendent is asking me tons of questions about the guy. When I said he worked for Jerk Company, well, that didn't go over well. From my understanding, Jerk Company was at a risk of losing the contract they had with Stupid Incorporated over this. Jerk Company then started digging around, and I heard they found out who it was, and the guy lost his job over it. The kicker? He wasn't even working for Stupid Incorporated that day. The superintendent told me they didn't have Jerk Company out working on anything. One of his employees had seen the truck I described way on the other side of Stupid Incorporated's site. He hadn't even stopped there. As far as anyone knows, he actually was there as a private user. And had he just said as much, none of this would have happened. Now, I do need to clear up a couple of things. It's not like the guy said, "Yeah, I work for this company, but I'm off today." I get that a lot actually, and never have an issue with it. The guy specifically told me he worked for Jerk Company and was working down at Kilometer X, which was the location for Stupid Incorporated. I asked him to confirm the company he was headed to work for, and he specifically named Stupid Incorporated. I told him that company and their subcontractors were not allowed to go that way, and he started yelling and swearing at me. During his hissy fit, he said he's been down that road several times when not working. I told him that private users, so individuals not there on behalf of a company, legally can't be stopped. It's a legal gray area. Yes, it's stupid, but private user equals not there representing a company equals can go. Employee or subcontractor equals there to do work on behalf of a company equals cannot go. After explaining this, he got all smug looking and declared he was a private user. He thought he'd found a loophole. It wasn't like he said, "Well, I'm actually not here for work today, I just do work for this company." Instead, he was a straight up butthole about the entire situation and very clearly lied to my face about being a private user. Again, I don't know why he was truly there. I never found out. All I know is he lied to my face, gave me trouble, which is another finable offense actually, but that's a whole other thing, and thought he'd found a loophole. The way the situation itself played out, I guarantee, based on the information given to me by him, that I was not confused on the matter. Also, when I say 4-day manhunt, what I mean is that it took 4 days for the various companies to figure out exactly who this guy was, as he didn't give me a name.
and it's an incredibly common truck description. He didn't vanish into the woods never to be seen again. Apologies for any confusion there. I was never hoping the guy would lose his job. Honestly, I wanted him to get chewed out as a nice bit of karma. This dude was nasty. Very colorful language, and at 6:10 a.m., I was so not in the mood to get screamed at. I knew about the fine, which is why I said, "You've been warned," prior to him taking off. I knew that things were going to be ugly for him when his boss got his hands on him. I did not hope or really expect that he would lose his job. I can't deny that I do feel a tiny sliver of satisfaction because guys like this need to be taken down several pegs, but I do also feel bad that it cost him his job. I believe this would be a case of screw around and find out, and I sincerely hope that he's learned something from this and will be nicer to people just doing their jobs in the future. Can't take my lunch because of training? I don't think so. Posted by According Air 5665. In my mid-20s, I worked for a multinational accounting firm. I, a female, have always had a real firm policy for standing up when something doesn't sound right, irrelevant if it puts me in an awkward position. This story is how I maliciously complied and, in turn, made my director learn a lesson I hope she won't forget. We'll call her Karen, not her real name. Background on Karen. When she joined the team, we all liked her. She made great changes and we got on well with her. But the moment she was promoted to director and had direct reporting to the partner, she flipped, became a complete different person and made our life heck. Previously, she spent her career heading up call centers, which was really evident in her management style, and for some reason made it her mission to cut costs in the team and go under budget. This affected everything, from telling us we didn't have a stationary budget for pens and had to take from other team stores, to only allowing a one drink, one course policy on team dinner events. This was a huge company and other teams around us would go for fancy, all expenses paid social events, so we felt pretty put out. Her cost cutting also extended to things like no overtime approvals unless way in advance. Now that didn't last long as we were understaffed, so quickly emergencies weren't dealt with, and hiring school leavers instead of graduates as they were cheaper despite the work needing more experience. Her favorite saying to everything was, "It's policy," or blaming HR or higher-ups, saying whatever new thing, even if a new irrelevant spreadsheet, would come from HR. Honestly, the amount of time HR spent on our little team in a company of 20K plus UK employees was astounding. Then came the day she booked an all-day training session from some external company to show us how to use a new system. She went on about it for weeks, was super excited that she had brought in this new system. The training was intense, so freaking technical, mind-numbing, and most of all, expensive. So what would normally be covered over a few days was crammed into one full day. They were paid hourly. Shock? She sent an email advising how we're expected to attend. It will go through the whole day and lunch would be provided, but it will be a working lunch, so training would also be through lunch. Needless to say, the thought of sitting in a stuffy room for 8 hours without a lunch break was not appealing. I asked for an exception as I really relied on going outside for the hour at lunch for a break. I was in the midst of high anxiety at the time and my breaks got me through. She said it's policy that we would be expected to change our workday around to fit training, and there is no policy that requires her to allow me to go out. If I had an issue, I should check the HR manual. I think, until now, this statement usually worked for her as no one really ever checked. I went one better. I went to HR. Cue malicious compliance. Using the effective wording of, "for my mental health and well-being," HR replied, and of course disagreed, as UK law mandates training as work and an 8-hour day requires at least 1 hour break, which I am allowed to choose what I do with. They CC'd Karen. Karen backed down, but verbally told me it was an exception for me and not to share with the rest of the team. Of course, I didn't comply. She was breaking the law. So I showed the email chain to everyone as they were complaining about the same thing. So me and the rest of the team came up with a little plan. Sandwiches were delivered. Budget sandwiches, of course, from the supermarket down the road.
instead of our slightly more expensive internal catering team who caters for this exact type of thing for our 10th-floor building. I stood up and announced I was going on lunch and would be back in an hour. Cue the rest of the team, all 12, standing up after me. Karen goes, "Where are you all going?" To which someone replied, "Hey, I understand that HR said that we were allowed to leave the room for the hour of lunch." The look on her face. She knew she was stuck. She couldn't say anything. We left her in there alone with the 2 trainers who seemed to guess something was up. I've never felt more satisfied in my life. We all had a good laugh about it outside, and I think I even did a happy dance. She also knew she couldn't complain to me about it, as that would highlight her breaking the rules. I felt like I was walking on air all day. After this, there was much less blaming of HR, and generally, she was a little skittish around me because she knew that I didn't take her crap and I'd call her out. A second training session had to be booked since the training would never have worked in one day. There were lots of moans and groans about how expensive the extra training session cost, of course. I left a couple months afterwards, and so did pretty much the rest of my team, replaced by school leavers, of course, but I'm very glad that I complied. I believe Karen still works there, but for a much smaller team. Okay, boss, I will hit my KPIs, posted by Letawin. This story came from 5 years ago when I had worked for a small IT MSP company. We had 4 full-time techs, with the newest tech having about 5 years of experience, and me being the most seasoned tech with nearly 15 years of experience. Between the 4 of us, we managed about 1,000 PCs and about 20 servers spread out over about 30 clients. None of us were assigned to a specific client. We would all take turns grabbing whatever tickets came in. All of our work was lump sum or contract work, so we never had to worry about how long a problem took to fix or how much it would cost the client. We had an account manager who handled all the billing and things with the clients. It was a dream job for a tech. We got to show up and do our jobs and not have to deal with sales or billing or any other client drama. I not only had the most experience, but was also the most self-motivated. I would often come in early and get started on the tickets that came in after hours, and I would assist the other techs if they came across a complex problem. Everyone, including the owner, referred to me as the senior tech, even though that wasn't my title. After 2 years working there, I decided to talk to the owner about a raise. I brought all kinds of information to our meeting, showing that I had closed the most tickets and received the most positive feedback from a survey that we sent our clients. He agreed to give me a raise, but said he wanted to think about how much to give me and that he would get back to me. A few weeks later, he called a company meeting and announced that he had decided to change some things and that he would no longer be giving anyone raises. Instead, he would set up KPIs, key performance indicators, and the entire tech team would receive weekly bonuses based on hitting those numbers. I didn't like this at all, as it meant my pay was dependent on the performance of everyone on the team, and not just me. I found out later one of the other techs had also asked for a raise, so this was the owner's solution to pay us less. The KPIs were simple enough. If a ticket came in, we had to acknowledge it within 15 minutes to achieve a score of 100. If we missed the 15-minute window, the score for that ticket was 0. There were a total of 10 things that we had to hit, including how long the ticket was open before we marked it as complete. If the total score for the week was above 90, we each received a $100 bonus. I saw major problems with this bonus system, and I shared my concerns with the owner. He got very annoyed with me and said, "Just hit the KPIs." Cue the malicious compliance. We all figured out pretty quickly how to game the KPI system. We could acknowledge a ticket in the system, but it didn't check if we had actually called the client. We would just email and mark the ticket as reached out to the client. A big issue is that sometimes the client would put in a low priority ticket and ask that we schedule it for some time the following week. But that would make us miss our KPI. So we would start hounding the client to schedule it sooner, and if they weren't available, we would simply close the ticket. We quickly learned to hit our KPIs and start getting a bonus every week.
However, it caused our customer service to drop, which is exactly what I had warned the owner of. During the previous 2 years, we had never had a complaint about our service, but now there were multiple complaints every week. This whole process added a ton of stress to us as we all started to fight when someone missed a KPI, and we all started to work late on Fridays to try and get in those last few numbers. After 2 months, the owner finally realized he had made a mistake. He removed the bonus system without giving us a raise and asked us to go back to how things were. At this point, I was so stressed that I had already started looking for another job, and we had lost 2 clients. I was the first to put in my 2 weeks notice, but before I left, the other 3 techs had all put in notice as well. The last I heard, the company had lost over half its clients, and the owner had to bring in several new techs, paying them over 20% more than I had asked for my raise.
HOA Karen denies us paramedics our parking spot. Arrest her. Click the video on the screen to find out what happens to HOA Karen, and I'll see you there.